Welcome to this edition of Political Empire. I'm Duane Gang of the Press Enterprise and PE.com. We have a good show for you today, but we're going to get right into some presidential politics. On the phone now with me is Ben Goad, our Washington correspondent, and we're going to discuss some new poll numbers out about the Republican presidential race here in California. Ben, it's good to have you here.
Great to be with you.
All right, so the new field poll is out, and we've got some interesting numbers here that we're going to go over on the Republican race in California. So let's get to the numbers right away. Let's take a look at what we've got here. The latest numbers on the field poll, you can see this is a trend of how all of the major candidates right now have trended in California since June. And you can see kind of how it's kind of trended. The most recent numbers, so this is as of February 11th through 18th that the field poll conducted, Mitt Romney, 31%, followed then by Rick Santorum at 25%, Ron Paul at 16%, and Newt Gingrich at 12%. So you can see there, Santorum, Mitt Romney, of course, is that blue line, and he's kind of held steady, spiked a little bit at the beginning of February, and is down to about 31%. But you can really kind of see the spikes with Santorum and Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich is there in the red, and he spiked up to 23% in November, and then now he's down to 12%. But then Santorum's kind of come out of nowhere. So June, September, November, single digits. Then in February, he's really jumped up. So we're going to talk with Ben about these numbers. So Ben, how do these numbers compare to some of the national numbers, some of their numbers elsewhere in the country right now?
Well, Duane, certainly Santorum has spiked everywhere. In fact, several national polls show him in the lead. So some show him ahead by as many as 10 or 12 points. He's really been surging since he swept primaries earlier this month and caucuses in Colorado, Minnesota, and Missouri. But, field poll director Mark DiCamillo points out that in today's story that California Republicans tend to be a bit more on the moderate side, especially on social issues, and Santorum might be a bit out of step with them, which is why he may not be leading here in California.
What's the Romney campaign saying about these numbers here in California?
Well, they downplay the national polls. They point out that several candidates like Santorum came out of nowhere to claim front-runner status at some point in the race. We've seen that with Herman Cain, with Gingrich, with Rick Perry. But Romney's camp makes the point that they've been solidly near the top all along.
Yeah, so, we had it there on the chart. You can see just the fluctuation in the numbers with, particularly with Rick Santorum and Newt Gingrich. So why the fluctuation here on these numbers in this GOP contest? It seems like they haven't really been able to rally behind someone yet.
Yeah, that's right. There's a feeling that Republicans just aren't excited about the candidates. In fact, today's poll found that 39% of Republican voters in California are either not too satisfied or not satisfied at all with their options. That number has grown steadily from previous polls over the last several months.
Right. Let's switch gears now and let's talk about a Democrat. The senior Democrat from California, U.S. Senator Diane Feinstein, was here in Riverside today. She was speaking at the Chamber of Commerce and she was touring a factory. Ben, what's the latest? She's making this inland stop. What's the latest out of her from Washington these days?
Well, beyond being California's senior senator, she serves on some key committees. She's very active. She's on the Judiciary Committee, Appropriations, and she's also chairman of the Intelligence Committee. But she's also working on some local stuff. She has joined several inland lawmakers in pushing for increased funding for a major construction project on the 91 freeway. And she's also been trying to pass a bill, a very big bill, that would set aside more than 1 million acres of land in the high desert not to be developed. And so she's pushing those things. I think she also talked about some other initiatives during her swing through Riverside today, right, Duane?
Yeah, that's right, Ben. She talked and touched on a number of important local issues when she was speaking today before the Riverside Chamber of Commerce. She did mention the Desert Monument Bill, and she also mentioned the 91 freeway. But she also touched base on the Riverside UCR Medical School. In particular, yesterday she sent a letter to Governor Jerry Brown urging him to come up and find a way to come up with $15 million in state support for the medical school. Of course, the money for the medical school, the state support, has not been included in any of the governor's budget proposals yet. And that's kind of really hampering the medical school's ability to kind of get off the ground. They're still trying, and they're still trying to raise some private money, and they may open, the dean told me that they may try to open at least at a minimal level with about 50 students, but they still ultimately need some state support. And she really, I mean, when she talked about the medical school today, she got a really kind of thunderous applause from the business leaders and the elected officials in the at the Chamber of Commerce today. It's a really important local issue, and she was urging people to call and write to the governor and urge him to include money. I think we've got a video clip of that, so we're gonna hear what she had to say now.
So I'm gonna need your help to call on our great governor, Jerry Brown, and say, Jerry, you've got to find $15 million. In a budget of trillions, it can be found. And your encouragement with the Board of Regents to see that the school's opening, $15 million.
Yeah, again, so she's urging people to get out and contact the governor's office and ask for his support on the UCR Medical School. The other interesting thing that I took out of her speech today, is she is planning on introducing some legislation that would kind of reduce the tax rate for companies that manufacture things domestically. They're calling it, at least now tentatively, a patent box legislation. It's something that European countries have. And in essence, here's how it would work. According to her office, if a company has a patent on a product, and then that patent and that product is manufactured here domestically, the profits from that product would be taxed at 15% rather than the higher 35%. So the idea is to create kind of an incentive for people to manufacture domestically. We asked her about that as well, and so we're going to play that clip now.
The purpose is to create an incentive to manufacture the product that you patent here in the state or in the United States. And if you do, then the profits from that product, the taxes on those profits is reduced to 15%.
So again, that's Senator Diane Feinstein talking about a piece of legislation that she hopes to introduce here when they return from the President's Day recess. This is kind of her first of, I think, a couple two-day stop here in the inland area. Later in the day, she toured a plastic recycling plant here in Riverside. It's a plant that's been up and running for about 6 weeks, but they're going to have a grand opening on it next week, and they hope to get the governor down for it. But it in essence takes plastic materials, recycles them to be made into plastic bottles in the future. And then she's also got stops in Corona tomorrow and a few other places here. So that's kind of the latest from Senator Feinstein's visit. So Ben, appreciate you taking a few minutes today to chat with us on the phone.
Well, thanks for having me, Duane.
All right, and when we return, we're going to talk with Jim Miller, our Sacramento correspondent, about some legislation that's going to be pending up in Sacramento. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
We cover the issues you care about. Here at the Press Enterprise and PE.com, local news matters whether you live along Route 66 or on Main Street. We provide regional analysis and in-depth investigation of issues like education, transportation, the environment, and much more. Important matters are covered here. That is how we keep you connected to your community. The Press Enterprise and PE.com. For home delivery, call 1-800-794-NEWS.
Welcome back to Political Empire. I'm Duane Gang of the Press Enterprise and PE.com. I'm joined on the phone now by Jim Miller, our Sacramento correspondent. We're going to talk about a few bills that are before the legislature, and of course there's an upcoming deadline for lawmakers to file bills. Jim, let's start with this effort by Governor Jerry Brown to kind of totally revamp how the state regulates gambling. Of course, we've got a number of tribal casinos here in the inland region. So what is he attempting to do here?
That is still to be learned. He first proposed this in his budget proposal last month that was released on January 10th. And since then, it hasn't really been publicly fleshed out. The California Gambling, well, what the governor is proposing is to consolidate some of the duties of the California Gambling Control Commission inside of the Department of Justice, which is part of the Attorney General's office. The governor, of course, was Attorney General before he became governor, and this is all kind of taking place in the context of California potentially legalizing some form of online gambling.
Yeah, you know, with the way this is going, I mean, this is a total kind of, even though the details aren't really out there yet, this is a total kind of revamp of how the state does this. Is the industries, the gambling industry, are the tribes expected to come out in opposition to this, or is it kind of too early to tell?
I think it's maybe a little too early to tell. People are waiting to see details, and I think you may find tribes on both sides of the governor's plan. In the story that ran earlier this week, we had quotes from tribal officials, some who thought the governor's plan maybe was a good idea, others who were maybe a little more skeptical, because they feel they've built up a good working relationship with the Gambling Control Commission, and the fear of the unknown of how that might change.
So that will definitely be something to watch, particularly because the gaming industry is pretty big here in the inland area. Now, Friday is the deadline for lawmakers to file and submit legislation for this session. So what are some of our local lawmakers doing? I understand Assemblyman Kevin Jeffries has a bill concerning fire crews. What's he attempting to do here?
Yeah, it's an interesting bill. As a result of the realignment of low-level criminals from the state prison system to local jails and to local jurisdiction, the fire crew program has lost its labor supply. Essentially, these low-level inmates were the ones who were put out on fire crews. Now they're down at the county level, 58 different counties, and there's a lot of just logistical changes that have taken place because of realignment. And Assemblyman Jeffries' bill is trying to maintain the program in some form by giving counties a greater role. I believe it's going to come up for a hearing. It's already been introduced, and it should have its first hearing here next month or early April.
Well, I know that Riverside County, the Board of Supervisors, this is an issue that's come up before, and they've discussed it, even to the point of suggesting, because of realignment, suggesting what would it take, and maybe the county should look into creating its own fire crews program, its own inmate fire crew program. So that bill that Assemblyman Jeffrey has is definitely going to be one that I know a lot of our local lawmakers, our local Board of Supervisors are going to be following closely.
Yeah,
right.
and like you're saying there, it definitely comes down to money. This was something that was paid for by the state, and because of realignment, the spending on jailing these inmates has been shifted to locals. Do they get reimbursed for having fire crews? So that's some of the issues that need to be hashed out.
Yeah, and during fire season, our local fire departments in the past have really heavily relied on inmate crews to do a lot of work. So what about some of our other lawmakers? I know there's a couple others that have some interesting legislation that they're going to try to pitch.
Yeah, there are a couple other ones. There's because of the metal theft problem, scourge that has hit much of the state. Assemblywoman Carter from Rialto, Democrat from Rialto, has introduced legislation that would allow law enforcement to stop any vehicle carrying scrap metal and try to ascertain where it came from and to make sure it was taken lawfully. There is also another bill by Assemblyman Paul Cook from a Republican from Yucca Valley that would make it so at-will employees, such as a chief of staff to a county supervisor, for example, who is convicted of a crime in the performance of their duties, that person would lose their pension. And it's legislation that directly stems from some of the issues going on in San Bernardino County right now.
Right. Well, that will also be an interesting one to watch. I know, you know, it always seems like people always raise those questions about what they can do with staff members or others who are charged and later maybe even convicted of crimes. So that will be one to watch. Jim, on the phone from Sacramento, appreciate you taking a few minutes to chat with us today about what's going on in Sacramento.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so we're going to take a break and we'll be right back. You're watching Political Empire.
We cover the issues you care about. Here at the Press Enterprise and PE.com, local news matters whether you live along Route 66 or on Main Street. We provide regional analysis and in-depth investigation of issues like education, transportation, the environment, and much more. Important matters are covered here. That is how we keep you connected to your community. The Press Enterprise and PE.com. For home delivery, call 1-800-794-NEWS.
Welcome back to Political Empire. I'm Duane Gang from the Press Enterprise and PE.com. I'm joined now by Press Enterprise columnist Cassie McDuff to talk about an interesting race in the city of San Bernardino. Cassie, tell me a little bit about the clerk's race there. We recently had a runoff election, but now we've got a recount. I mean, how close is this race?
Well, it was 2 votes apart on election night, and when the ballots were canvassed, they were 3 votes apart. So the candidate who was defeated, Amelia Sanchez Lopez, has asked for a recount.
So who's she in the race against?
Gigi Hanna is the winner by just a hair. She is a former public relations professional, a former journalist. She worked at Cal State's Water Resources Institute, and then she took a leave to run for this office in November.
So how does the recount process work? I mean, how long is it going to take for us to figure out if we have a new city clerk in San Bernardino?
Well, it's a really small citywide election. Just over 12,000 votes were cast total. And so it's going to take, according to the registrar, Michael J. Scarpello, he expects it only will take 1 day to do the recount. It's going to be done by machine. It's not a hand recount where every ballot will be looked at, but they'll just be fed through the machines again. Some ballots, however, will be re-inspected, and those are the ones that were not counted because the signature on the ballot envelope, this was a mail-in election, didn't match the signature on the voter registration card.
Right. Now, this race was kind of interesting in the sense that typically other elected officials, city clerks' races generally can be a little low-key. But in this particular case, City Attorney Jim Penman actually kind of got involved, and he ran with one of the clerk candidates as kind of a ticket, which is kind of unusual. Who's he backing in the race?
He was backing Amelia Sanchez Lopez, and in fact, in the general election in November, she was one of 5 candidates. She was the top vote getter. So in the runoff, she ran against Gigi Hanna, and that's where Hanna just edged her out.
Right. So clearly some of her other opponents, those that were not successful in making it into the runoff, went and supported the other candidate in this race to make it the way it was. Well, that's definitely interesting, and that's definitely one that we're going to have to watch because it's not too often that you get elections that are that close, even local city council and city clerks races. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. So you've been watching today Political Empire, our weekly roundup of the political news in Riverside and San Bernardino counties. Be sure to pick up a copy of the Press Enterprise or go to PE.com for the latest. And of course, we'll see you back here next week. Thanks for watching.